I'm going to take about 5 minutes for each one and ask them if they would to introduce themselves, what they do, and just some perspective very briefly on the issue of ICT security and critical infrastructure protection. After we do the introductions, we'll be going back and looking at more deeply the important work that they do, both from a policy perspective, technology perspective, and of course, international cooperation. So with that, Ignacio, I'd like to introduce yourselves, and thank you very much for hosting this and for the Mexican government for making this beautiful facility available for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very happy to have this important event here in Mexico for the first time, particularly in a moment in which Mexico is undergoing a very important structural reform in the communications sector. My name is Ignacio Peralta. I'm the Undersecretary of Communications at the Ministry of Transportation and Communication in Mexico. I'm based in Mexico City. My background is in economics, and I've been doing the last 2 years basically the work for the constitutional reform and the secondary law reform as well. Previous to that, I was in the transition team of the elected president, now President of Mexico, then elected President of Mexico, Mr. Peña Nieto, designing what's going to be the policies on telecommunications sector for this administration. Thank you.
Danielle?
Sure. Hi, I'm Danielle Kriz. I'm with the Information Technology Industry Council, which is a high-tech trade association in Washington, D.C. So thank you for having me here. We represent 60 major multinational technology companies in the hardware, software, and services aspect of IT, and they're not just headquartered in the U.S. We have representation from companies outside the U.S., from Europe, Japan, Korea, Canada, and actually we just recently had Tata Consulting from India join ITI. So we're actually a new member of WCIT, and we're thrilled to work with WCIT, but we've been working with a lot of the associations for years. We do a lot of global policy work. I lead the cybersecurity policy work for ITI, and I've actually been doing high-tech policy for 18 years. I started out in the US government for 10 years, doing trade policy for the high-tech industry, and about 10 or 12 years ago began to see cybersecurity policies come about that had implications for trade and business. So I began to really get involved in the US government's work in about 2002. I spent 4 years out in Silicon Valley after leaving the government in 2006, and then came back to Washington, D.C. 4 years ago to lead the cybersecurity work at ITI. I just want to quickly talk about the work we do at ITI on cybersecurity. So we represent the high-tech industry, and we want to work with governments around the world because cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. The government can't do it alone, and industry can't do it alone. The threats are always changing, the technology is always changing, the infrastructure is constantly changing, and so we need to be working together on this. So we work with governments to help them to adopt policies that actually increase cybersecurity, but at the same time preserving trade and innovation. And we don't think they're mutually exclusive. If companies can't innovate, we can't be going after the next threat. We can't be being a step ahead of the cyber criminals. We own and operate most of the infrastructure, so we have a vested interest in seeing it be secure. So we think there's huge roles for industries in participating in partnerships with the government, contributing to the development of global cybersecurity standards, and building and maintaining secure technologies and services, and we do all of those things. But we think that the government role is critical. Governments can and should be doing a lot to improve cybersecurity. And what we think they should be doing is developing and implementing their policies in an open and transparent manner, and allowing stakeholders to be involved in creating those policies, and leveraging what we in industry are already doing, which a lot of us have been doing work in cybersecurity for a few decades, to make sure policies are flexible and can bend and react when the threats change, make sure policies are workable globally, Cyberspace doesn't stop at anybody's boundaries, and the threats don't either, and the technologies need to interoperate. And so we want all of our governments to make sure the policies can work across borders. And policies need to drive innovation and be market driven. So we want to make sure that there's no technology requirements in cybersecurity policies. And it's really important that governments strengthen their own institutions, develop cybersecurity strategies, build up their capability with certs, and invest in research and development and raising awareness of what their citizens can do. So these are things that, you know, I work very closely with the US government on the policies it's been developing for the last 4 years. Work also with European governments, the Japanese government, China, India, Korea, and others. And you know, we're really trying to, again, work with our governments so that we can all tackle this issue together. And I'd be happy later on to talk a little bit more about what's been happening in the United States.
Thank you, Danielle. Professor Shinoda.
Okay. I'm Yoichi Shinoda, and I'm a college professor at Japan Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, or JAST in short, and teaching networking, internet networking, and security, network securities. So I'm basically a tech guy, but in addition to teaching and experimenting and doing some research, I have been serving as the advisor for information security at the National Information Security Center, or NISC in short, of the Government Secretariat, Cabinet Secretariat of the Government of Japan since March of 2007, I guess. The NISC, which I help people, the policymaker, to make policies, was founded in April 2005. So this is a 10-year-old institution, and it is responsible for establishing national cybersecurity policies. And it is also responsible for security operation of the government agencies, as well as incident handling. Over the last 10 years, we have published numerous cybersecurity-related policy documents, standards, and guidelines, and the latest development around NISC is the registration of the Cybersecurity Basic Act. After 10 years of cybersecurity history, Japan will finally have a basic act to fight against the cyber threats and make better use of ICTs. So the Howard talked about wisdoms that you guys can bring back home. And here might be the first wisdom that you can bring as a souvenir. As we wrote the policies and guidelines at NISC, we have invented several important key phrases or keywords that I want to share with the audience today. The first is the accident-assumed society. People ought to think their life is very safe. The politicians ought to believe their policies or their countries are flawless, but they're not. The cybersecurity world, you can put so many money, with so many efforts to make the systems complete, but there will be eventually a security breach. So what we have to do is to assume there will be an accident or an incident. Bad things will happen. So the people, or the government, the companies must be prepared to cope with the incidents. So that's the accident-assumed society. The second one is there are no more separation of cyber and physical space. Things go bad on a cyberspace. They will eventually come back and impact the physical life, either economically or physically. And the last one is everyone is in the front line. The physical confrontation of the powers or the fight against diseases, contagious diseases, only a small portion of the people or fighting at the front line. But in the cyberspace, every users of the ICT are directly confronting with the adversary parties. So so it is very important for everybody, every individuals, every companies, every government to realize that they are all in the front line. Today, I want to add a word, responsibility, or as a phrase, global responsibility for everyone in the cyberspace. We, the users of ICT, not only individuals but also industries and governments, have rights to seek our benefits and should protect ourselves and our own assets from growing cyber threats. This is true. But we are also responsible for maintaining the health of the cyberspace because we are all connected. Each one of us is right next to everyone else in the world. I want everybody to be aware that any irresponsible behavior will almost always affect everybody else in the world in some way or another. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. William.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. It's my first time in Mexico, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be in such an exciting city and hopefully get some time to explore it as well. Cybersecurity. I work for a company called Alvarez or Marsal. I'm based in Brazil. I've been living in Brazil for about 12 months. And my focus is really on helping clients after they've been attacked, after they've had a problem. But at the same time, turn that knowledge, that experience, into helping clients that haven't yet been attacked to build better strategies and better plans to support and protect their business. Before that, I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the UK for about 5 years, and then I worked across Europe, in Italy, France, and a bit in the Middle East, primarily for technology companies, Symantec, IBM. What gets me really excited about cybersecurity isn't just the technology. It's around the people and the cultural aspects. And I think something that we tend to forget when we look at cybersecurity is this is really tough. It's really complicated. And I think it's also important to think that we're probably, as a sector, as an industry, not really doing a very good job of cybersecurity, because when you look at how many organizations continue to get hacked on a daily basis, it should make us think, how can we do things differently? What other people can we pull into this field to help us and create different solutions? About 6 weeks ago, the head of security of the Bank of England declared that he had just hired a psychologist, a criminal psychologist, into his cybersecurity team. Excellent. By understanding the criminals, we can build better solutions. I also think we need to look at different countries and understand where we are with the levels of maturity. Certain countries are leading the pack, are doing fantastic work, and I think we can take good experiences and bad experiences from them and work better in countries that are not as mature. I think there's also a big problem around skills shortage. And when I hear people say, oh, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, I always think, you probably are, but you just don't know it. If you use a computer, if you bank online, I'm sure you've got ideas and experience that can help to contribute to better and more robust solutions. So I think today is a fantastic opportunity to share some ideas with different colleagues from around the world and hopefully get questions from you too as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. Ignacio, I have a question specifically for you. Your previous experiences as a mayor in doing economic development, you were Secretary of Economic Development. Now you're the Undersecretary in Telecommunications and Transportation. When President Obama asked me to come back to the White House in 2009, he talked about the national security piece of it, but also the other part, the economic piece of it. Could you tell us a little bit about your perspective in the Mexican government on economy and how it ties to telecommunications and why it's so important?
In Mexico, well, this is for all countries. The telecommunications sector should be an engine for economic growth and economic activity. Should be an engine as well for productivity for business and people in general. In Mexico, it was not really the case. I mean, possibilities of the telecommunications sector could be an engine to have a very boost or impulse the economic growth was a little bit difficult because we were in a situation in which services, quality of services was very low. Prices for end users was very high. Coverage and penetration of services as well was very low. So it was necessary to make a big and deep transformation of the sector to transform the environment into a much more competitive environment, the market, and to create the possibilities to, in a competitive environment, to increase coverage, penetration with a high quality services and international prices. As we already heard in some presentations before, the possibility of a country to increase the penetration of broadband, mobile broadband services has some kind of impact on the GDP growth. So that's what Mexico wants to do in the next few years. We are convinced that the transformation of the Mexican market into a competitive environment with the constitutional and secondary law reform will take place very soon. This sector moves very fast, very quick, and it will be sooner than expected, I believe. It will take a few years, but it will be very, very fast. And to increase the penetration of services and to increase productivity of people. So it will have a very important impact on the economic growth and the evolution of the economy in general. Of course, the public policy is divided in two main pillars. One is the regulatory body, which has to do its part, let's say. And the other part is the projects or the public policy projects that we have to build in the next years. The networks, the backbone network and the wholesaler network, and using the spectrum of the 700 megahertz band, they're parts of a more broad, let's say, policy to enhance the possibility that the telecommunication will increase economic growth. Of course, protecting the infrastructure, protecting data, using telecommunication for public safety issues and national security issues as well. Those are one of the main issues that we have on the table right now, and we need to develop some policies that go in that direction. I mean, using telecommunication for national security, for public policy, for public safety, sorry, to enhance economic growth and to protect the data and infrastructure are some of the main points that we're working on it to provide certainty and to provide the right conditions to make it happen.
Well, thank you very much. And Danielle, I'll give you a little different twist to that question, because you work with, not only the U.S. government, a lot of companies, and we talk a lot about critical infrastructure, and we always, look at from loss of energy or loss of telecommunications, but we don't talk that much about the economy, as we just heard a moment ago. What's the role of the people that you deal with when they look at this? Is it all about just security and making things stronger? Is it also have an economic component?
It's definitely both. I work with companies that build technologies, and they work with companies that use those technologies and that underpin all countries' economies. So cybersecurity is, everybody uses the internet now. There's cross-border transactions happening constantly. There's e-government, there's all these services that are being delivered to citizens on an increasing basis, some of which are not just Facebook and social media, but are really critical to economy's growth, such as in healthcare and helping small businesses and that kind of thing. So all of these transactions need security if people are going to use them, if there's going to be trust, if people are going to be sending money around the world or interacting with suppliers or customers using technology, they've got to feel that that it's secure. And at the same time, if you're going to be innovating, you want to have security. It really underpins your ability to innovate. So, and that really means that the policies have to be right. There's a lot of companies in different sectors, in the financial services sector, that are coming up with all kinds of new products and services for online finance, and they're building more and more security into those technologies. You have connected cars, you have the Internet of Things. I think Dr. Chen from Taiwan this morning talked about cloud computing and the Internet of Things and these new technologies that are coming on the horizon, and people are not going to adopt those, and companies won't adopt those if they feel that there's not security. And again, security is not just about the technology that's in a product. It's about the use of the product. It's about the resilience of the system and our ability to go after the criminals that are going after us. It's a very multi-dimensional issue, and it's also about the personal responsibility and how you, interact with the technology. But all of that is necessary if we're going to see the economic growth that we've been seeing. So, we were pleased. Howard, you mentioned you were brought back to the White House in 2009, and President Obama, asked you to look at both national security and the economic aspect. And that's what we've seen in the United States in the last 4 or 5 years of policy in cybersecurity. Not that it wasn't there before, but there's a definite commitment to balancing both of those, to having a cybersecurity policy approach in the U.S. that looks at the national security dimensions, but looks at the economic dimensions, and how do we have cybersecurity policies that are flexible, that allows the tech industry to innovate, but any industry to innovate, and allows them to do business globally. Because if we don't have economic growth and innovation, none of it really matters. So that's how we look at it, and that's why we've really been happy with when governments take those policies that look at both, because they're not mutually exclusive.
Thank you. Professor, when you look at critical infrastructure, in the U.S., we, after 9/11, now have designated 17 sectors as critical. But you can't fix everything at one time. So the president, many people have said, what are the most critical? And I think most of us believe telecommunications, ICT, financial services, energy, and of course the government, because the government needs to keep working. From your research and the work you do in Japan, do you agree or disagree that some sectors are more critical than others, particularly now that we talk about the Internet of Things where everything has an IP address? What's your perspective from Japan as far as what's really critical and what are the second tier type things?
Well, in Japan, the protection of the critical infrastructures are basically responsibility of each infrastructure providers. And the role of NISC is to provide guidelines or gather the action plans and manage them so that the critical infrastructure providers can make a steady step toward their goals of the secure critical infrastructures. As I said, NISC establishes guidelines and action plans, and NISC also coordinates and supports the individual companies within the different industry sectors to exchange information about threats and handle incidents and establish risk management within their individual countries. The reason for this arrangement is that we believe that the cybersecurity of the infrastructures should be self-motivated or market-driven. Okay. market-driven and self-motivated is it's contradicting word, but market-driven and self-motivated. Otherwise, it is not sustainable. Coming up with a new legislation, new very strong law that enforces something will impact the economy of the infrastructures, and the effectiveness will quickly degrade because people don't like them. So we always try to promote the self-motivated measures of the industries or the sector, critical infrastructure sectors to do their own job.
One more question for you before I move on to William on that. So the legislation that's been moving through Japan, when you look at all the legislation we've had all around the world, you know, the U.S., we've sort of, because we've been the victim of many of these things for so long, we get good at creating laws which sometimes conflict. If you had the ability to create a law to make critical infrastructure more secure in Japan, what are the 2 or 3 things that you think you would have in it?
Well, in my personal impression, it would be responsible. Just as I said at the beginning of this session, be responsible for people, be responsible for your stockholders. Just like, yeah, be responsible for people. Just be responsible for the society. Be responsible for the rest of the world. So that would be my reservation.
We'll take notes of that.
Okay.
William, Canada, Brazil, I think the discussion about critical infrastructure is much different between the two. You're in Brazil now, we have major events coming up.
I have 2 questions, in fact. I would like to ask for the governments, how were they on cybersecurity in the deployment of infrastructure projects? I know Mexico has big projects of connectivity, but what's the way of the cybersecurity? I don't know what kind of technologies are you applying, maybe real-time analytics, or what are you expect? And what's the way of cybersecurity and protecting the infrastructure in these projects? And the second one is about usability versus security. I mean, how to choose, or what's the correct balance of choosing between usability and send urgent information versus using the mechanisms? I mean, do you need to improve maybe more secure and usable encryption technologies, more friendly users, or how can we balance that way?
Anyone?
I didn't quite catch that.
Sorry?
Did you get that question, Howard? Can you repeat it, or?
I can't hear you now.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I couldn't hear the question.
Oh,
Yeah.
could somebody closer, because there was a bad echo up here. I got any bits and pieces to like that. That's not me, by the way.
Okay, I hear. Okay. What's the way of cybersecurity in the deployment?
Maybe here.
Okay. Maybe if you could come to this microphone. Sorry. This is ICT working today.
Things running analog.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, it's okay now? Yeah.
I can hear that. It's.
Okay, well, let's give it a try again.
And who, I'm sorry, who is the question directed to?
The first one is for Mr. Peralta, but maybe if anyone would like to add about their experience in other parts of how the way of cybersecurity in the deployment of infrastructure and connectivity projects like Mexico is working on. I mean, is it that cybersecurity a heavy way to choose maybe providers, maybe choosing technologies, more than investments and more than reducing digital breach, for example. What's the way of cybersecurity in these projects? And the second one was about choosing the correct balance between usability and security. I mean, maybe there is a need to improve and work on more secure and usable technologies, or how to make this balance correct.
Good. Okay. Would you like to take the first?
In terms of infrastructure in Mexico, I believe that I could make just a quick comment in terms of what we want in terms of infrastructure. I would say that first is to share infrastructure. Second is to deploy infrastructure that we don't have. I mean, we have certain parts of the country in which you don't have any infrastructure, so we have to find the right mechanism to deploy according to population concentration and things like that. And third, it's how to deploy infrastructure which could keep the cost of deployment low, to go into a much more competitive prices into the market. And the last comment will be to protect infrastructure, how to keep those radio bases and all the fiber optics and whatever we deploy in optimal conditions. So what we did in the law is to create the right conditions to more or less take care of all these issues and to provide the incentives to find solutions and to deploy with a low cost, with a shared concept of infrastructure, and to protect infrastructure as well.
Anyone else for the second question?
I mean, I'll take a stab at the second question. I mean, I touched on that earlier where I talked about usability versus security. Something that I think is important is that we don't bolt security on afterwards. I see that all the time at clients. Security is an afterthought. Security needs to be built in at the beginning, and you need to involve people from marketing, you need to involve people from finance, you need to build solutions that really take advantage of everyone and all the expertise you have in your company. And when you don't do that and you bolt it on afterwards, it's more expensive and it tends to be complicated. I think another thing that's important to remember is that you're never going to get perfect security. Perfect security doesn't exist. And it's important that you be prepared to be attacked, or you be prepared to suffer loss. One thing that I'm working on, I'm going a little off on a tangent here, but one thing that I'm working on a lot now is cyber insurance. So a lot of companies are thinking, how can I transfer the risk? I know that this application or this service has certain limitations, it has certain risks, and that's okay. I'm going to accept those risks, because to take those risks right down to close to zero would cost too much money. So I will transfer those risks to a cyber insurance policy, and I think we'll see much more of that in the future.
So if I make 2 points on what you just said, one of them is building security in from the very outset. I remember the days when antivirus was something special. And now you would no longer deploy an ICT system without anti-malware, those things. So it's becoming integrated. But what we still continue to see is the development process. And for full disclosure, organization, nonprofit called SafeCode, the Software Assurance Forum for Excellence in Code, Microsoft, Siemens, SAP, Intel, a lot of the big multinational companies are getting together and say, how can we write better software? Because we're spending a lot of money on purchasing software and firmware and tablets and devices that we still have fundamental flaws into the coding of it. And that becomes an issue for all of us to deal with. The second piece, when we look about the people that actually have the expertise, and when you look across this room, most people here are experts in some area or another, but we should not have to worry about training everyone to become a security expert. Professor, you mentioned earlier, it's got to be a balance between easy to use and things of that nature. So that's where it being built in, it's on us to say, what are the requirements we need, to ask our government colleagues, here's what we need from you, while at the same time going back to the providers and saying, we don't need this, we need something more.
Can I comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just like what you said, the balance between the usability and the security must be pre-designed based on the risks, and it must be built in. Okay. In Japan or Japanese government, we call it security by design, SBDs. It's originally from the physical security domain, but we apply it to the ICT systems also. And the important thing is that that's a provider's view, service provider's view, to calculate, pre-calculate the risks, put some measures, and allow the remaining risk and bad things to happen. Okay. But important thing is that users must be informed of the remaining risks. You have to do that. Okay. Users must be informed of the benefits they can receive from this such and such authorization procedures, but also the remaining risks. That's important.
Are there any more questions out there? Well, that's good, because we're running out of time, and I want to give each panelist an opportunity to sort of wrap up in their own words sort of the issue of critical infrastructure protection, and how we can close out with conveying that wisdom to you. So, Ignacio.
Well, I would take the phrase of there are no perfect security. So this is a continuous work that we have to keep going on all the time. I believe that the best way to find solutions it's insist in mass collaboration and shared practices, international practice, and shared knowledge, shared experience, and to design the right policies to harmonize the laws and to try to understand that this is a global solutions. I mean, there's global problems, so we need global solutions. And the only way to find a global solution will be sharing all this knowledge and all the experience. I think that something that we need to do in the going forward is to find the proper mechanism to harmonize the legal framework. It's going to be a little bit difficult if we're facing the same situation in different countries, but we're trying to find solutions to tackle with the different legal frameworks, and that will be one of the tasks that we have to do going forward.
Danielle?
My remarks are very similar in terms of the global solutions to this. Again, I represent an industry group, and in the audience I know are a lot of other industry groups and associations from around the world. I know WCIT has dozens and dozens of member associations, and there's also governments in the room here. And I think we as global industry need to be working together and encouraging all of our governments to take approaches that improve security but also allow for economic growth and innovation. And and we have to realize as well, I think some of my colleagues mentioned, that different countries are at very different stages in using the internet and sophistication of cybersecurity laws, or even having the ability to fight cyber crime. And we as the global high-tech industry completely understand that and have been doing a lot to do capacity building around the world, helping a lot of countries around the world, figure out how do you develop a strategy. I mean, we've had 5 or 6 of them in the US. I know that's not the case for a lot of countries, and it's not just a strategy, but how do you train your law enforcement to deal with cyber threats? How do you work with your population to raise awareness? Certainly we don't have it perfect in the United States. There's a lot of people that click on the wrong links or don't patch their own computers at home, and we all contribute to that. But I think there's a lot of good knowledge that's out there, a lot of lessons learned. I think some of us have gotten it wrong, or we've gotten it right. We want to be able to share that. So I think that's the key takeaway, is that cybersecurity is inherently global, and none of us can get it right within our own country. And so I think speaking on behalf of ITI and our companies, we would like to work with more of you to come up with policies that governments want to embrace, and we want to work on this together. So, thanks.
Thank you. Professor?
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, my last comment will be start today. Okay, there are lots of things you can do for the measurement, for the measures of the cybersecurity, but there are certain areas which takes very long time. Those are awareness raising and capacity building. Other technical, measures, if you have money, you can buy it. It's instant. But awareness raising, you have to change how people think in the cyberspace. It takes very long time, 10 years, 20 years, maybe biological time. The capacity building, teach people how to react or respond to bad things that happen in their cyberspace. Okay. That also takes very long time. They first have to be educated. They first have to be aware, informed. Then they could be trained for the bad things. So it takes even longer. So please start out today in your own domain.
From my side, I think, we've talked about some of the negatives today, but there's so many positives about cybersecurity. I think it can create so many opportunities for countries, for employment, for young people. We're already seeing, for example, in the US and in the UK, it's driving an incredible amount of jobs for young people. So I think that's fantastic. So it's not just about negatives, but there's a lot of positives as well. The things that I think are important to keep in mind, based on my experience, as I said before, this isn't about technology. Technology is an important part of it, but it's much, much bigger than technology. And the second thing is we really do need to get the executives, the leaders involved. So ask them some difficult questions. Ask them, is cybersecurity on our company's risk register? Or ask them, how many breaches do you think we suffered last year? Or what would happen if the news van, the local news van, turned up in the parking lot right now after a data breach, after an attack, and wanted to speak to you? What would you say to him? We need to get them involved, and I think if we get them involved, we'll all have a lot better, more robust solutions in place.
Thank you, William. Well, I'd like to close this session with a couple quick comments. One, once again, many, many thanks to Jim and Witsa and Anders and Fernanda and so many people that have made this possible, not only for our panel, which has taken a fair amount of work, but also for the conditions we have here and everyone being able to be a part of this. The second thing is, when we look at the ICT issue, and I couldn't, I'm the eternal optimist, I couldn't agree more with William that we have received tremendous benefits from ICT. Yes, we have problems. Yes, we deal with problems, but as the gentleman had asked earlier about sharing information, if we make that as a high priority, a lot of the things we can keep from happening bad with us. And lastly, I would like to, many, many thanks to our distinguished panel, not only for traveling long distances, but also for the local hospitality. So I ask all of the audience to join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you for attending.